On May 5, 1945, during the final days of World War II in Western Austria, a small group of American soldiers formed an unlikely alliance with members of the German army to protect the lives of French politicians and VIPs who have been imprisoned in a medieval castle.
This is the most unlikely battle by the most ragtag, eclectic mix of fighters in military history, yet alone World War II.
Attacked by elite SS troops, this band of unlikely brothers, outnumbered and outgunned, would fight one of the craziest battles of the Second World War, in a fight for their lives and the lives of the French prisoners.
These Frenchmen want the end of the war. Of course, they want free France. They want to get back into the country that they love. But they know before they do, they have to survive.
In 1925, Adolf Hitler becomes the leader of the re-established Nazi Party. After the stock market crash of 1929, Germany is destitute. Hitler capitalizes on that and becomes Chancellor of Germany in 1933, taking control of the state.
Hitler comes along and is very good at blame-mongering, scapegoating, playing the us versus them card. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and really he rode that all the way to power in 1933.
The Dachau camp, just north of Munich, is set up in March of that year to incarcerate political opponents. But as the Nazis ramp up their heinous racial agenda and Jewish people are arrested en masse, Dachau morphs into a detention site to commit mass murder.
These are not people known for their moral qualms about killing. There was no paperwork generally associated with this process. These processes took place, under the cover of darkness, as it were, and they were sort of, designed for maximum efficiency more than anything else.
In 1938, Austria is the first country to be annexed to Germany. 105,000 troops of the German 8th Army arrive on March 12, 1938.
Austria is Hitler's home. And when the Reich came together in the 1870s, they had this idea that Austria was a part of the German Reich. So it was always seen by old school traditional Germans as part of the German nation. So when Hitler does come to power and they begin to progress forward as a nation, he decides we are going to take part, and all later, of Austria.
The Reichsfuhrer himself, Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's right-hand man, leads the troops to the pacification of Austria. Himmler is particularly taken with the mountainous Tyrolean region, which he views as a potential Alpine fortress.
I think it's the sort of fairy tale version that we know the likes of Hitler and Himmler buy into, these kind of remote fortresses that exemplify German prowess.
A remote medieval castle captures his attention, Castle Itter. He leases the castle from the first deputy governor of Tyrol, though its initial purpose is unknown.
If you're Himmler, this is a spot where you could potentially envision yourself controlling this region, pulling the strings. It's possible that the rumors of a Nazi fortification are a result of the secretive nature of the Nazi Party and how protective they were of information. It could also be just part of the sensationalism that existed surrounding the Nazis in the late 1930s.
As the Nazis gain more power, they continue to expand the Reich's borders. The Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, with a large ethnic German population, is annexed to Germany in 1938 as part of the Munich Agreement signed by European leaders, including French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier, an agreement to prevent another war in Europe. But Hitler is not done with Germany's expansion. To house the growing number of political opponents and those that were deemed racially inferior civilians, the Nazis build more concentration camps to take the burden off of Dachau. Sachsenhausen opens in 1936. Buchenwald opens in 1937. Ravensbrück, originally an all-female camp, opens in May 1939. As with Dachau, they all have isolated areas where VIP prisoners are segregated from the horrors of the rest of the camps.
There were some camps, Ravensbrück and elsewhere, for the French, some for Scandinavians. There were camps just for women. There were camps for homosexuals, camps for Jews, so they were segregated. But in the Dachau complex, there's a camp for high-ranking political prisoners, and I mean high-ranking political prisoners, ambassadors, former heads of state.
With the invasion of Poland by German forces in September of 1939, World War II breaks out. 2 days later, England and France declare war on Germany.
The Germans will invade first from the west, the Russians a few weeks later from the east, and between the two of them they will conquer Poland, and both sides are responsible for unspeakable atrocities.
Meanwhile in France, now on a war footing, French Prime Minister Daladier, along with his top military official, Maurice Gamelin, start to build up their forces, but decide to minimize potential French losses by going on the defensive rather than offensive. He faces major criticism for his passive behavior towards Germany by the French public and his most virulent political rival, Paul Reynaud, who had opposed the Munich Agreement. The decision made by Daladier and Gamelin would ultimately lead to France's occupation. Germany begins their campaign against France on March 10, 1940. The French are taken by surprise as the Germans attack from central Belgium, which Gamelin believes is an impossible feat. The French front is breached in only 5 days.
They take France, and by June of 1940, they have secured most of Western Europe, right? They've taken the Netherlands, the Benelux countries of Belgium, Luxembourg, they've taken Denmark, they'll take Norway as well. So in effect, by the fall of 1940, the war has been won.
Facing massive public scrutiny and disapproval, Daladier resigns on March 21, 1940, and is replaced by his arch political opponent, Reynaud. Gamelin is unable to redeem himself in Reynaud's eyes and is replaced on May 18, 1940, by General Maxime Weygand, a seasoned military commander from World War I. But it's too late, and France falls into German control.
The important footnote to that, the fly in the ointment, is the United Kingdom, which of course still has punch, it still has fight. And what the Germans realize is that if they don't take it out, not only is their victory incomplete, but they leave potentially a staging ground should the United States get involved in the war. And that's a big if, because the United States is a neutral country, but Germany is not clueless.
With France's defeat, General Weygand advises the French government to capitulate. But Prime Minister Reynaud refuses. But with the backing of the cabinet, Reynaud's Deputy Marshal Pétain sides with Weygand. And on June 15th, the French government approached Germany about the cessation of active hostilities. Reynaud resigns the next day, and Pétain succeeds him to form the Vichy regime, a puppet government in German-controlled France.
It would be safe to call it a puppet government. It is doing what the people in Berlin want it to do. It is not going to resist or put up much of a fight to anything that is coming out of Berlin.
The Germans also allow the French to keep a small, limited force called the Armistice Army under the control of the Vichy government. Oppositions to the regime are imprisoned and handed over to the Germans, including former Prime Ministers Léon Blum, who was leader of France for a year in 1936, his successor, Edouard Daladier, as well as General Gamelin.
They were taken to various camps, various detention facilities, and these were the people who were the VIPs in these facilities, the people who the Germans were rightly aware of how important they were as political tools and ways to engage with the Allies potentially and gain leverage in the diplomatic side of the war.
But these may not be secure enough facilities for such high-profile captives.
They have a value, as long as they're alive. You know, it's like, why don't you kill your hostage? Because he might be useful to you. He's no good dead. That's the thinking in Germany. You know, there's an affection for some of these political leaders, and also they're reviled in a landscape where there's going to be a desperate scrabble to try and reinvent Europe. Hitler knows that.
But opposition is far from stamped out in France. To stop open opposition to the Reich, Hitler signs the Nacht und Nebel Act in 1941.
It's basically a tactic of night and fog. And the tactic is to get rid of perceived enemies of National Socialism.
About 200,000 French residents are secretly deported to Germany for being political activists against the Nazi regime.
The Nazis loved to pose as legal actors in the sense that they would always cover their misdeeds by passing a law first.
Many wind up in concentration camps, but the French resistance movement is growing.
Initially, those resistance movements take all shapes. Perhaps they're resisting arrest. Perhaps they're resisting by handing out flyers. Perhaps they're resisting by trying to kill someone. There are different forms of resistance at that time. However, it pops up organically.
In January of 1942, now exiled in the United Kingdom, French army officer and statesman Charles de Gaulle tries to unite the different groups by positioning himself as a leader of them all.
De Gaulle is trying to lead their effort from afar, from Britain. And that's not working out as well as planned in the early days.
De Gaulle meets up with French resistance fighter Jean-Pierre Moulin, a former civil servant who has made his way to Britain. De Gaulle gave Moulin an assignment of coordinating and unifying the various resistance groups and accept de Gaulle as their leader of his Free France movement. Moulin secretly returns to France.
They also have to worry about the issue of who's with who in France.
France is in chaos as the Nazis have complete control of Pétain's puppet Vichy regime. Major French political figures are about to be put on trial. On February 19, 1942, the Riom trials begin as an attempt by the Vichy regime to prove that the former leaders of France are responsible for the country's defeat by Germany in 1940.
This was done in a French court. This was done by a French government. Therefore, it is legitimate. If it's done either in Berlin or explicitly by Germans, it doesn't have any sense of legitimacy with the people.
The secondary aim is to force France to accept responsibility for the war. Léon Blum, Edouard Daladier, and Maurice Gamelin all stand trial.
So you want to present to them that this is all within a French culture, within the French legal system, and that it's all taking place and it's all above board.
The Germans' plan backfired. Although Gamelin refused to engage in the trial, the defense put forward by Blum and Daladier were largely successful in rebutting the charges and won sympathetic coverage in the international press. Hitler orders the trial suspension to stop further embarrassment, although Blum, Daladier, and Gamelin were returned to prison. And so France falls into a lengthy period of effective German occupation with no end in sight. With much of mainland Europe now under Nazi control, they go about fortifying the Atlantic Wall's extensive system of defenses and fortifications along the coasts of continental Europe and Scandinavia. After 3 years of Nazi expansion, finally, the Allies hit back and seized the offensive. On November 8, 1942, the Americans and the British launched Operation Torch to take Morocco and Algeria, who at this time were French colonies aligned with Germany via Vichy France.
Operation Torch is the invasion of North Africa. It is done by all the Allied armies in the Western Hemisphere, and their goal is to disintegrate the power bloc in North Africa.
The French Army of Africa switched their allegiance from the Vichy regime to Free France, led by Charles de Gaulle. This is the first major operation carried out as a joint effort by the Allies, and a notable setback for the Nazis. Back in France, the Germans retaliate and occupy the whole of the country, disbanding the Armistice Army of Vichy and move French political prisoners.
The VIPs of Dachau are to be sent to a new place, an Alpine retreat called Castle Itter.
On November 23, 1942, just days after the Allied invasion of North Africa, Hitler signs an order to acquire Schloss Itter, Castle Itter outright, to be used for special SS prisoners.
There's something in that that makes them feel both powerful and safe, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this particular Schloss was selected.
Himmler seizes it from the current owner to transform it into the most high-profile sub-camp of the concentration camp system under Dachau's control.
It's a chaotic scene in all the places where Nazis have taken over. A lot of political prisoners being rounded up, people who are suspected of being not Nazi sympathizers, they're being picked up off the streets regularly.
As more German troops are now in France, on December 1st of 1942, a new French resistance group is founded, recognizing General Henri Giraud as France's leader, which is backed by the United States and operates out of North Africa. However, Winston Churchill supports Charles de Gaulle as the leader of Free France, as he's been running operations in England since the invasion of France.
The situation, it intensifies with more German troops there, with more Nazi officials there to take greater control of the country. I think part of it certainly is a response to what happens in Africa, but then the other part of it too is a recognition that Allied forces are building up and that an invasion is going to come.
As the resistance movement is finding its footing, high-profile French citizens are seized by the Nazis, including relatives of both Giraud and de Gaulle. They will be moved to Castle Itter after its conversion into an upscale prison. On February 8, 1943, a small group of concentration camp prisoners from Dachau and Flossenburg arrived to convert Castle Itter into a VIP detention facility.
What's going to happen is this Schloss Itter will become the most high-profile sub-camp under the administration of Dachau. By May 1943, so in the wake of what's unfolded in North Africa and the full occupation of France, you now have these big political scalps being moved into one place, a sort of revamped, top-notch prison. As prisons go, this ain't such a bad place to be. They've got a courtyard, they've got reasonable food, but the SS and this, Himmler make sure that it's a special SS camp and it's properly guarded, pretty sinister.
They make a dormitory for 35 SS troops, an arms room filled with weapons behind heavily locked doors, offices, and private suites for the SS commanders and administration workers, and even a modest medical facility.
It becomes this location where the French elite is eventually pulled together from various locations and put there.
On May 2nd, 1943, the first VIP prisoners arrive at Castle Itter from Buchenwald. Former French Premier Edouard Daladier, his former general Maurice Gamelin, and labor union leader Léon Jouot. 8 days later, more prisoners arrive. Jean Bouratra, a tennis star who served as the sports commissioner for Vichy before denouncing the regime, and former PM Paul Reynaud. Though they've been in separate prisons for years, Daladier and Reynaud remain as hostile as ever towards each other.
You talk about politicians not being able to compromise or break bread. Well, they're not even in a Nazi prison camp.
On June 19, 1943, Augusta Bruclin arrives, Léon Jouot's long-term partner. Her French resistance activities lead to her arrest and imprisonment. On July 2nd, 2 more prisoners arrive. Christiane Mabille is the former secretary of Paul Reynaud and his future wife. The other, Marcel Granger, is the son-in-law of General Henri Giraud, leader of the Free French fighting forces in Africa. As the number of French VIP prisoners increases in Castle Itter, the French foes segregate themselves based on political views and avoid each other as much as possible.
Politics sure as heck didn't stop during the war or even imprisonment. This castle is a hotbed of political animosities and political maneuvering and political debate. It's as if a lot of these high-ranking former leaders, it's as if they thought they were still in office or something, because they continue to fight politically over everything.
With the tides of war turning heavily against the Nazis as Allied bombing increases in Europe, hitting deep into the heart of Germany, Berlin and the Germans defeat in Stalingrad, Himmler begins plotting a secret peace deal with the Allies.
The very heart of the SS starts to believe that maybe he can sway things a different direction for Nazi Germany. Maybe he can have a unique way to get what Nazi Germany wants.
But despite his attempts, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill will not engage.
And Heinrich Himmler is doing all of this behind the back of Adolf Hitler.
Meanwhile at Castle Itter, to ensure the well-being of the VIP prisoners, various labor prisoners are also there to perform maintenance duties. One in particular, electrician Zvonimir Kukovic, becomes friendly with the French VIPs and manages to sneak in a contraband radio so they can have access to BBC war updates. This proves to be extremely useful, especially as Allied victories begin to dominate the airwaves.
In England, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his deputy commanders chart the liberation of a lost continent.
The day finally arrives, June 6, 1944, D-Day. The Allies launch a combination of naval, air, and land assaults in Nazi-occupied France. The massive force consists of over 150,000 soldiers.
It is the D-Day. There were many D-Days around the world at different places and different islands, especially in the Pacific. But it is, to us, the D-Day.
The Allied Army now has a firm foothold in Europe, and the American 12th Army Group is officially established to attack Germany.
We see the Hitler wall, his Atlantic wall, being cracked for the first time, this supposedly impenetrable place by this tide of Allied soldiers.
The French resistance movements play a supporting role in this victory.
French resistance is critical, absolutely critical to the success of D-Day.
We managed to smuggle in something like 10,000 tons worth of munitions, courtesy of the resistance, who are blowing bridges for us, who are blowing train lines, who are blowing factories, who are doing what we needed them to do.
By 1944, Charles de Gaulle is accepted as the Free France leader by all.
On August of 1944, Paris falls, and it pretty much decapitates the entire Vichy government.
As the Allies gain ground, Himmler ramps up his plans for the last stronghold in the Tyrolean mountains surrounding Castle Itter.
An obvious advantage about going to Austria, the mountainous terrain, it's easier to defend, but also these high-ranking French prisoners. They could all be used as a bargaining chip.
To stop the Allies from entering Germany in December of 1944, Hitler launches a surprise offensive along the Western Front in the Ardennes region of Belgium.
Hitler's offensive into what becomes the Battle of the Bulge is really his last attempt to break the Allied lines in the West.
30 German divisions attack battle-fatigued American troops across 85 miles of the Ardennes forest during the freezing weather conditions.
This was a distant battle in a distant land, and the Americans were dying for the cause of freedom.
And on December 25th, 230,000 American soldiers arrived to restore the Western Front. The American Third Army breaks through the German lines, forcing them to retreat back into Germany on January 24th, 1945.
That Battle of the Bulge, certainly numerically in terms of the deaths and the way in which the Americans fought, I think that singled them out as worthy allies, and not just because they had the kit and the fresh feet and the big rations, but because they put their back into it.
It's just a matter of time now, and you start to see a lot more Nazis thinking about their own neck instead of worrying about what Adolf Hitler wants.
In January of 1945, in a desperate attempt to prolong the war against the advancing Allies, Hitler launches a propaganda disinformation campaign about a highly fortified Nazi stronghold that is being constructed in Tyrol, the Alpine fortress. The campaign is so successful that the Allies fall for it and change their strategic military plans as a result. Allied nations print stories and speculate that highly valued political prisoners will be held captive in the fortress.
This is a last stand. It's a place where their safety If anything can be guaranteed in war, their safety can be in this, or their captivity can be assured, and one's control over them can be assured in this remote, uncompromising, and very Germanic, I mean, I say that it's in Austria, of course, but very Germanic landscape. I think it's entirely fitting, really, that that is where they ended up.
With Germany's defeat becoming clearer, the VIP prisoners in Castle Itter begin to lose some of the comforts they have been enjoying.
If you're a prisoner in any camp, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
They must rely on candles for evening light to minimize electricity use. Food is also rationed to support the Nazis' war effort. More and more SS and Wehrmacht forces are retreating south, and the provisions in Castle Itter are given out to provide them with sustenance.
If you are the French elite in your castle, what was comfortable is going to become less comfortable. Resources are scarce. Are you going to feed your political prisoner, no matter how esteemed, if you don't have food for yourself? It's a desperate plight. The Germans aren't just on the back foot, they're being bent over backwards.
On March 22, 1945, British and American troops crossed the Rhine into Germany. German SS troops and Wehrmacht soldiers retreat into Austria to defend the Alpine fortress and ensure that the VIP prisoners do not fall into Allied hands. But their faithfulness to the Führer is wavering. German troops begin to separate into two categories: die-hard Nazi fanatics and those who want to surrender and end the war.
They're on the retreat at this point, and there's no turning back.
Led by Commander von Engel, a veteran of World War I, a highly decorated general in the Wehrmacht army, and a recipient of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the Nazi battle groups are a last-ditch effort to stop the Allies from entering Tyrol. Their primary mission: to defend the mountain passes from the incoming Americans by supervising roadblock, construction, and wiring demolition charges to bridges. With the Allies nearly on their doorstep, the Germans transfer some more political prisoners to Castle Itter. On April 13, 1945, Charles de Gaulle's sister, Mary Agnes, and her husband, Alfred Callot, would be the last VIP captives.
It's all about leverage. It's all about a last gasp for the Nazi regime. What can they wring out of their most precious French asset?
The French VIPs hope their liberation will come soon, before it's too late. And there could be hope on the horizon, as Austrian resistance fighters have enlisted the help of a highly decorated Wehrmacht officer, Major Sepp Gangl. Gangl had become opposed to the Nazis and was collaborating with the Austrian resistance.
Gangl realizes that may factor in well to his own post-war fate. So Gangl and his SS are willing to join the French and the Allies.
Well, it's all very convenient, isn't it, the last minute, when the Allies are rocking over the Danube to suddenly decide, oh, I've seen the light and I would like to help the captives in Schloss Itter, and hey, I'm going to turn these nasty SS boys in while you were fighting alongside them for years.
Noting the locations of obstacles and the numbers of Waffen-SS and Wehrmacht troops to the area, the resistance is able to perform many acts of sabotage and feed intel to the incoming Allies who are heading south from Germany. On April 24, 1945, the American 103rd Infantry Division unit begins pursuing the fleeing Nazis through Stuttgart to take Munsigen. The men cross the Danube River on April 26th near the German city of Ulm and make it into Austria, which they officially occupy on April 27th. Renault shares the information coming in from his radio, giving the VIPs hope that they'll be rescued by a relief force. But fanatical SS troops are all over Tyrol, questioning and killing indiscriminately. Those at the castle could be next.
As things change, and the fact that they have the radio and can hear more and more about actually what's going on around them, it does get to the point where it looks like they are no longer going to be useful as bargaining chips because they're not needed anymore.
And they weren't the only ones thinking this. In Berlin on April 28th, Hitler finds out that his second-in-command has been trying to negotiate peace deals with the Allies behind his back. Furious by this betrayal, Hitler orders the execution of Himmler's chief staff and strips Himmler of all of his authority to ensure he will never lead Germany. The days of the Reich are numbered.
That is really the end, obviously, of the relationship between Hitler and Himmler. It is also a very symbolic moment of the end of the Nazi Party.
The Allies are steadily flowing into Germany, liberating the cities and concentration camps. It's here where they realize the extent of the Nazis' abominable activities. On April 30th, the commander of Dachau flees to Castle Itter with his entire family. But before he leaves his post, he orders the execution of 2,000 prisoners, witnesses to the horrific conditions he put them through. With the Allied forces gaining ground in Germany, Hitler, seeing the inevitable demise of the Nazi regime, orders the execution of all VIP prisoners before they end up in Allied hands.
The SS know who these people are, they know where they are specifically, and for all the information that the VIPs have, they don't know exactly how close the Americans are.
And on April 30th, holed up in his underground bunker, Hitler commits suicide by swallowing a cyanide capsule and shooting himself, bringing an end to his dreams of a 1,000-year Reich.
The writing on the wall is for the regime, but my God, it's ugly. No wonder so many of them committed suicide. Better to die than to be convicted of war crimes, ignominiously, by the Allied forces.
Without him, there is no Nazi Party anymore.
May 1st, 1945, Gangel is assigned a slew of new duties by his superiors in the German battle group, which he must complete if he doesn't want to raise suspicion. Meanwhile, in Castle Itter, the former Dachau commander commits suicide on May 2nd, believing that resisting the incoming Allies is pointless. His death creates disorder as the Castle Itter guards ramp up their brutality on the non-French lesser prisoners.
Oh, to be Lee in that particular moment. I don't think, you cut the head off a regime which is all funneled towards one dictator, Hitler. You snuff him out, he snuffs himself out. Well, you're going to leave chaos in your wake. Himmler's already gone, don't forget. He's the leader of the SS. It's chaos.
The Alpine fortress, the Reich's final frontier, is now completely unraveling. On May 3rd, the 23rd Tank Battalion from the 12th Armored Division is on the move south from Munich. Leading the troops is 27-year-old Lieutenant Jack Lee. He's been the driving force of Company B for 5 months in an advance across France and to Germany, bound for the Alpine fortress of Tyrol. They reach the Inn River and Austrian border at Kufstein. They are met by elements of the battle group Giel, who attempt to defend a bridge, but the Americans easily overpower them, and the majority of the battle group is destroyed. Following the defeat at Inn River, von Engel deploys his remaining 1,400 SS troops to new positions, just east of Castle Itter. They are aware that the castle is housing hostages, and despite Hitler's orders to execute the prisoners, his death has triggered chaos in the German ranks, some deciding to turn on the Reich, and others seeing the prisoners as bargaining chips.
The consequences for the SS was going to be, especially for the Waffen-SS, was going to be much worse than for your average Wehrmacht soldier.
Meanwhile, on May 3rd, Castle Itter's radio shares the news that the American 103rd Infantry Division is in Innsbruck, only 70 kilometers away.
They're right there. They're essentially on your doorstep. This creates a need for action.
This sparks some rare collaboration between Daladier and Renault, who decides someone must leave the castle and bring the Allied unit to liberate them. They turn to Zvonimir Kukovic, the Yugoslavian that had smuggled in the radio for them.
So what unfolds is this movie-like plot of sending a Yugoslavian communist who's serving as the gardener of the operation, the caretaker of the castle, and sending him on an epic bike journey to try to reach American lines.
The SS troops, flooding the streets, stop and question him. But after telling them he was on an errand for the commander at the castle, they let him go. 3 hours later, reaching Innsbruck at last, he runs into lead elements of the 103rd. But the commander will not arrive until midnight. And as he is the only one that can put a plan into motion, the threat on the lives of VIPs from SS troops remain.
They're really getting desperate, and they want to know how to get out of here or how to survive.
But then there's a surprising chain of events at the castle. The German commander suddenly abandons his post and is quickly followed by the rest of the guards. The French VIPs are alone. Suddenly, they have their freedom.
They were free in the castle, but they certainly weren't safe because the entire region around them has the Wehrmacht or the SS, German soldiers, German military units. You can occasionally hear the firing of guns and the fighting. So should they leave the castle, they could be shot, they could be captured. But if they stay in the castle, is the castle going to be overrun? That's their quandary.
You have these two opposing sides politically from the pre-war era and the early war era who are now stuck in this situation together. They're arming themselves because they realize they don't know what's going to happen or who's going to come through the door next. And they're working as a unit together to try to figure out how they're going to survive.
The French VIPs assume that the Yugoslavian handyman, Kukovic, has been captured or killed, and they must make a new plan to ensure their survival.
Who's going to go out to find out what's going on? What kind of message can you get out there? Who's going to defect next? What's going to happen? No one knows.
The VIPs accept the offer of the castle's Czech cook, Andreas Krobot, to seek help.
These are unsung heroes in the war. Czech cook who also has to try to make it to the Americans. And the whole objective there is to tell them, we are here, come and save us.
Weaving through SS troops undetected, Krobot arrives in Virgil and has a chance encounter with Major Gangel, to whom he reveals the situation in Castle Itter. Gangel by now has defied orders to rejoin the SS and is now with the Austrian resistance as their leader. Upon hearing that the guards have abandoned Castle Itter, Gangel knows that now is the time to rescue the French VIPs and officially surrender to the American forces in Kufstein, only 14 kilometers away. Arriving in Kufstein, Gangel waves a white flag as he approaches Lieutenant Jack Lee, formally surrendering himself and his Wehrmacht men.
It's an unlikely meeting between a German major and an honorary, contrary American tank commander, but they agree that they will all head to the castle and liberate the castle.
Gangel's an interesting character because he's Austrian, I believe. There was an Austrian resistance. It grew stronger towards the end. He made the right call at the very end. He didn't fight with the SS. He betrayed the SS.
Lieutenant Jack Lee recognizes that rescuing these prisoners may be the last battle of World War II and his last chance for a promotion to captain. He volunteers to lead a relief mission and phones his supervisor, Colonel George Lynch, a highly decorated member of the 82nd Airborne Division, and requests permission and backup. Lynch gives the go-ahead and assures Lee that reinforcements will be right behind him. While abandoning one of his busted tanks, Lee chooses 8 soldiers to man the 2 Sherman tanks at their disposal. He also acquires 6 members of Company D of the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion to ride atop the tanks. And so begins the only known American-German alliance in World War II.
This ragtag convoy driving through the streets of Austria must have looked quite comical. You have the honorary Lee in his tank. He has the American soldiers sitting on top of the tank, and they're followed by a German major and a truck full of German soldiers all working together to go liberate French high-ranking politicians who were going to join this ragtag band.
Meanwhile, the Yugoslavian handyman Kukovic has successfully enlisted the help of Major John Kramers of the 103rd Infantry Division alongside French military liaison, Lieutenant Eric Luton. He understands that the French VIPs at Castle Itter are well-known politicians crucial to rebuilding post-war France. Kramers gets halfway to Castle Itter with his relief force and calls for backup, which his superiors deny.
No one contacts Lee, and no one says don't go for Lee. So at least that force is going to get through. But Kramers has the issue of chain of command is saying don't go. We don't know what's out there. Don't advance any further.
Incredulous, Kramers sends back his men, but defies his orders and continues on. But ahead of him, on the evening of May 4th, Lieutenant Lee and Major Gangel arrive at the castle, but they aren't what the VIPs were expecting.
So these former heads of state are expecting a grand army under a general to come in and save them and welcome them, probably with bottles of bubbly. Instead, you've got this cantankerous, disagreeable 27-year-old, a few men from an all-American unit, and Germans to liberate them. So they were less than impressed.
But no sooner had they arrived, mayhem is unleashed. The inevitable attack the French VIPs have been anticipating comes to fruition.
Lee is put in charge, kind of just haphazardly, of this ragtag bunch of people.
Waffen-SS troops emerged from the hills and opened fire on the castle with rifles and machine guns.
You have the French VIPs who are now armed. You have Lieutenant Lee's men who are in the armor and deployed along the ridge and around the castle. And then you have the Wehrmacht soldiers, and they are all firing the same direction to beat back this SS horde that is coming out of the woodlot below them.
Lee orders the French VIPs to hide in the castle's keep. Lee's men and the Wehrmacht troops move to their positions in the castle and begin to return fire.
The defenders of Castle Itter are truly, truly outnumbered. There are thousands of SS that are willing and able to come up the side of that hill and kill everyone there.
Both sides shoot haphazardly throughout the night, but come daybreak, things are going to get worse for the defenders of Itter Castle.
The one thing they have to hope is that they don't run out of ammunition.
That morning of May 5th, the 142nd Infantrymen that Lee was promised would be right behind him finally depart Kufstein, but don't head towards the castle.
The infantry that Lee was supposed to be getting is pulled back. Intelligence is lacking. They don't know what's going on. They don't know who's out there as far as the Americans are concerned. They are pulling back from this action, and Lee is basically left by himself to command this small garrison of people without infantry support.
At 8 a.m., a string of military vehicles unload over 100 SS troops, immediately sprinting to the woods surrounding the castle.
So now you have fresh troops, fresh weapons, they have ammunition, they have everything they need, and they are deploying against Castle Itter from different directions.
The SS soldiers begin pounding the exterior walls of the castle with machine guns, unloading rounds of 88mm shells at the defending soldiers and VIPs. One rams into Lee's tank near the castle entrance, detonating its gas tanks, turning it into a raging inferno.
They're running low on ammo and the numbers just don't work in their favor. Lee plans a very medieval defense, which is appropriate for a medieval castle, and that was castles have various walls. If your outer wall is breached, you move to the inner wall. If that's breached, you go to the keep, the inside, and that's your last stand. If they run out of ammunition, they're going to use knives, bayonets, and hand-to-hand and go down fighting.
With the loss of Lee's tank, the SS seem to have the upper hand. SS troops come flooding in from the tree line to the east and swarm the castle exterior. The American and German soldiers inside the castle return fire from the castle's upper walls, causing some damage to the SS troops below. The French VIPs join their ragtag offensive. Reynaud, Clemenceau, Larac, and Bouratra all unload their weapons on their Nazi attackers.
In all of World War II, there was not a more mismatched unit that was standing side by side fighting. German soldiers, American soldiers, French politicians, but they fought together.
Meanwhile, Kramers, who had defied orders, makes it to Vogel and spots the busted tank that Lee left behind. Kramers can't raise Lee on the radio, but then has a bizarre idea. He goes to the town hall and makes a call to the castle on a landline telephone. As the phone rings in the castle, Lee is surprised to hear at the other end a fellow American. Lee manages to explain that they are low on ammo when the line goes dead. Meanwhile, there could be good news for Kramers as 6 tanks from Company E of the 142nd Infantry come rolling into Vogel. However, they never got the order from General Lynch to head towards Castle Itter and provide backup and support for Jack Lee and his men. But Lynch is contacted and orders 3 tanks, including the Bosch Buster, that will carry on to Itter as a relief force. It's nearly 1 p.m. by the time they leave Vogel. Although the mishmash defenders are fighting with all their might, they have significantly less manpower than the Nazis firing at Castle Itter.
It's a game of survival, isn't it, at the end? The SS, what's interesting is that they don't run off to preserve themselves, and they keep shooting kind of myopically at the castle, trying to steam down and end it for the captives. You know, it's almost a case of, well, if I'm going to go down, you can too.
Bullets and weapons being used by the SS troops begin to take their toll on the castle's walls. Lee takes some of the troops to the courtyard to reposition, and some of the VIPs follow. Reynaud inadvertently puts himself in the line of fire.
Gangel meets his demise, and so Lee is left all by himself with Wehrmacht soldiers who now have no commander because Gangel could speak English along with German. Lee cannot speak German, and so now he has to command German troops, and he can't communicate with them.
With no time to fret over the loss of Major Gangel, Captain Jack Lee's American soldiers and Wehrmacht men continue to defend the castle. Lee wasn't able to provide proper instructions to Kramers and the incoming relief force before the line went dead. They need to send someone out to guide the American relief to the castle as soon as possible. Jean Boitrat volunteers for the task.
He is a very good runner and runs right past the German machine gun, and literally the Germans stop firing because they don't know what is going on when this person's running past them. It shocks them. And he is just as shocked as he's running past and they're not firing at him.
After eluding the SS troops, he breaks out into a run towards Wurgel, 5 kilometers away. Boitrat finds troops from the 142nd 2nd Battalion. Since he knows the exact positions of the Waffen-SS outside the castle, Boitrat suggests that he lead the American infantrymen towards the castle on the most direct route to Itter.
At this time, it's almost every man for themselves. And if someone is capable of pulling the trigger on someone, give them a weapon.
The Waffen-SS forces prepare to unload another weapon onto Castle Itter, the Panzerfaust. As one of the SS men settles into position to fire at the castle's front gate, he pauses. An overwhelming sound of automatic weapons and tank guns behind the SS troops grows louder and louder.
All these reinforcements are coming in. Lee thinks he's cut off and possibly surrounded. And then all of a sudden these reinforcements starts coming into the Castle Itter site or around the woods, sometimes behind the SS lines, and they have to try to get out of there as quickly as possible.
The Waffen-SS make a mad dash to the woods, but are rounded up to become POWs.
Everyone is starting to funnel in towards Castle Itter because messages from people who are either on bicycle or running through the woods have finally gotten out. And this chaotic situation is now getting a little bit more settled into an all-out engagement and being able to push away the enemy.
Within 24 hours, the American reinforcements have overwhelmed the SS troops, and the castle is liberated with its occupants.
The German soldiers who helped defend the castle and who surrendered, the few that lived through this, they were not freed, but they were not killed. Nor did they stand trial. They were imprisoned. But they lived through the war, which is seemingly what they wanted.
The VIPs are safe at last, and for his role in protecting the French VIPs, Lee is promoted to captain and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross.
Lee, who was known for being contrary and gruff and short with everything, as the relief force arrives, he greets them with the simple words, "What took you so long?"
Major Kramers transports the French VIPs to Innsbruck with some backup from the relief force. The French VIPs are safely transported back to France, including the 2 former prime ministers, Daladier and Reynaud, whose mini-alliance in battle was now at an end.
So it's really interesting that these 2 political rivals who were political rivals before the war, political rivals when France was invaded, were political rivals in Castle Itter, were still political rivals even afterwards, and still couldn't say a nice thing about each other as far as Castle Itter is concerned. They still thought to put that in their memoirs about Castle Itter, that they still didn't agree and they still could blame each other.
Over the next 24 hours, Lynch helps to broker a local ceasefire and the surrender of all German soldiers in Tyrol, the decisive end of the Waffen-SS grip on the region. On May 7th, Germany surrenders unconditionally to the Allies, with many of their Nazi leaders now gone.
Hitler's dead, Goebbels is dead, Himmler and Göring were captured and commit suicide, all the top echelon.
It's a long road ahead to rebuild. 1.5 million German refugees poured into Austria before the war ends.
Berlin is reduced to rubble. Entire German units all across the continent have just surrendered or run away, and the long European nightmare comes to an end.
Foreign aid programs are set up to help restore the region from utter chaos inflicted by the Nazis.
Now we have to rebuild Europe. Don't forget that cities had been bombed, which meant that raw sewage was, exposed. People are homeless all across the continent. There are hundreds of thousands of concentration camp prisoners who are now living in displaced persons camps, many of them without food, water, still wearing the uniforms from the camps. Carcasses of cows and humans and horses are strewn across the entire continent. So the war ends, but the toll from the war is going to take quite some time.
The battle for Castle Itter is the strangest battle the world has forgotten.
We tend to think about what happens in Berlin more than what happens in Austria. And I think that is what makes Castle Itter such a great story.
American troops, Wehrmacht soldiers, and captive French notables fighting alongside each other.
Schloss Itter story, whether you drill down into the French narrative, that compromised Vichy regime. Who do we blame? Where do we throw down the moral gauntlet? I think it's more complicated than that, and that's what's interesting about Schloss Itter.
In an Alpine castle that was used as a prison, you literally have one American tank, a handful of soldiers from an American unit, a few French politicians, a famous tennis player, celebrities fighting against the Germans. That is a strange battle.